Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. This is the second of two parts of what in my mind is really a single video on the musical group Coil. So we're not going to do any introduction or preamble or anything, just pick up basically exactly where we left off at the end of the last video. So if you've not seen part one, I think you'll probably definitely want to watch that before you watch this, and you can find a link to that part one in the description below. All right, so let's see. We left off basically at the end of the 1980s in Coil's discography. So we'll pick up in the early 90s with their album Love's Secret Domain from 1991. In some sense, I think we could actually see this album as fitting more closely with the 1980s material and being the end of what, as we'll talk about a little bit more later, John Ballance would later refer to as Coil's solar period. This is kind of the last album in that sort of period. And then there's kind of intermediate period throughout a lot of the 90s. And then starting in the late 90s, they shift to their more lunar sort of period. And so we'll be mainly focusing on those, but I think this album will also plant some of the seeds that leads into the sort of intermediate period that we'll be talking about in just a moment. All right, so as the initials of the album title here make clear, this is a very psychedelic and drug-infused album of Coil's, which, you know, all of their albums are to a greater or lesser extent, but this one especially. I know they were using a lot of MDMA and participating in the sort of the rave culture that was so big and seminal in, you know, the late 1980s UK culture. So that, again, I think this album is really saturated in MDMA and amphetamines and LSD, and definitely has a huge influence on the really dense kind of psychedelic nature of the sound. And whereas in the previous two albums, or the main albums anyways, Horse Rotivator and Scatology, the sound palette, while certainly not limited to the industrial sound, is still, I think, you know, within the realm of what we think of when we think of industrial music. Here, there's a great influence being drawn from the acid house scene of the time, and really moving away from, I think, anything that's really recognizably industrial in any ordinary sense of that word. Let's see, the track listing that I've got here on the screen that you're seeing here, this is the track listing from the original like vinyl pressing of the album. There's a longer, the CD version included several tracks that aren't included here, though I actually don't really care for a few of them, so I actually much prefer this track listing to, to some of the later material. Let's see, we're going to talk about one of these tracks in a little bit more detail, some of the lyrics to Titan Arch. Overall, I don't have a huge amount to say about this album. I think it really shows them pushing their sampling methodology into new places of these extremely dense, layered, and, you know, again, very psychedelic sort of compositions. But yeah, I think extending some of their techniques there, and it's certainly musically interesting in that way. Let's see. Let's just move on and talk about some of the lyrics to the song Titan Arch. All right, so we're not going to look at the whole lyrics to the song, but just this one verse here. There are thrones underground and monarchs upon them. They walk serene in spaces between. So fairly simple verse here, but as we will see, there's several kind of complex references happening here, and this will also lead us into some discussions of Coil's further development from this point further on. So we get sort of two references here. The first two lines of this verse, there are thrones underground and monarchs upon them, are drawn from the epigraph to Kenneth Grant's book. I think it's is that the fifth book? Yeah, in the Typhonian trilogies. See, Kenneth Grant, for those who aren't familiar, he was Aleister Crowley's secretary, and by at least some accounts, one of Crowley's successors as the head of OTO, or at least the UK branch of OTO, though there's a whole kind of controversy about that we're not going to get into. Grant was also really instrumental in sort of rediscovering Osman Spare towards the end of Spare's life, and helping to sort of popularize Spare and really to bring Spare into bring Spare to the attention of the sort of esoteric world, whereas Spare had been quite an obscure sort of figure before that time. Though, Grant also, I think, imposes some of his own ideas and concerns on Spare's own philosophy. But Grant is certainly a very important figure in bringing like Crowley and Spare together and developing some of their ideas. And there's a number of other concern or interests of Grant that really resonate with some of the culture of the industrial scene at the time, as well as some of what's sometimes referred to as England's hidden reverse, based on a book that we'll talk about at the end of the video here, including groups like Current 93, who David Tibet, who's the main figure in that group, was also very interested in Kenneth Grant and helped to introduce his work and Spare's to that scene. So Coil was definitely interested in Grant. Grant is a really complex, I think, thinker, and we can definitely deal with Grant and work through some of his works in like a future video series, though that I'm sure won't be for quite a while here. But in any case, in the epigraph to his work, Outside the Circles of Time, we read, "For there are thrones underground, and the monarchs upon them reign over space and beyond. Invoke them in darkness, outside the circles of time. In silence, in sleep, in conjurations of chaos, the deep will respond." And this is being quoted from a kind of received or inspired text of Grant's. And then added to this, we also have a quotation from the Necronomicon, which is, of course, the fictional grimoire created by H.P. Lovecraft. Probably the most famous sort of fictional quotation from the work from Lovecraft. "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die." So throughout this quote, besides just the two lines that Coil are directly appropriating for Titan Arch, we see a lot of other themes that we've already touched on. And then interestingly, the next two lines in Titan Arch about they walk serene and spaces between, this is also drawn from a sort of fictional quotation from the Necronomicon, embedded in another H.P. Lovecraft story, The Dunwich Horror, where we read, "The old ones were, the old ones are, and the old ones shall be, not in the spaces we know, but between them. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us unseen." So I think this is just interesting here that from this Kenneth Grant sort of epigraph, we have the link between the first two lines and H.P. Lovecraft. The Coil are looking to a different Lovecraft text and a different sort of citation from the Necronomicon, and adding that here. So we get this interesting kind of web of connections starting to be built up, which we will extend on the next slide. And we will come back to the Necronomicon and to H.P. Lovecraft and the significance of those, the significance of Lovecraft and weird fiction more generally for a culture later in this series. All right, so let's see. This is some notes that you're seeing on the screen here. The text here is some notes that John Ballance was working up. This was published in a book called The Cupboard Under the Stairs that has a number of sort of facsimile images of some of Ballance's notebooks and unpublished writings and materials that was just published a couple years back. So let's see, this is some notes from a track called Baby Food, which I really love. I think it's a great sort of minimalist instrumental track. If you've not heard it, definitely worth looking up. Let's see, this was originally included on some compilation called Chaos and Expansion, which I've actually never listened to, but it was later collected on a compilation of Coil's own materials called Unnatural History 3. There's 3 of these Unnatural History volumes collecting various things they did for different compilations or singles, and some soundtrack work like the unused soundtrack for Hellraiser that Coil recorded, or at least recorded part of. But in any case, in these notebooks, Ballance was making some notes about baby food and the new kind of approach to sound that they were developing. So in these notes, he's sort of working through some things. There's a lot of kind of cross-outs and rewriting and things like that, and it's not always extremely coherent, but I've tried to pick out some pieces of it here that I think are useful and suggestive. So he writes, baby food is a new move into the spaces between the sound sources. So we hear that, that use of that phrase, the spaces between, that we saw in Titan Arch and being connected to Grant and Lovecraft. Let's see, continuing on, he says, baby food is a vacant latency. It is a recollection constructed in silence and sound of memorial references of astral timbres, reverberations received sideways, perceived sideways, a sideways perception of a furious future tense. So we can see him just kind of playing with the sound of words and free associating, which is something you see quite a lot in these notebooks, and was obviously a very important sort of working method for balance, and has some definitely connections to surrealist methods, free association, and even the kind of autonomy of language itself, and seemingly chance or contingent connections between words based on their sounds. All right, continuing on in the next paragraph here, which is somewhat later in the text that he's writing. Microtonalities, the subtle, detailed patterns, inset, implanted. Sound is a plastic pattern that maps a landscape of tones and signal. So I think one of the things that's interesting here is that he's making references to Osman Spare's concept of the sidereal. Spare did a number of sidereal paintings, which are, you can see an example on the screen there, which are paintings. A lot of them are of celebrities and starlets, where he's taken the image and distorted it. It might look like like I've got the aspect sort of ratio of the image wrong. Like I think we're all familiar with this nowadays from images being stretched in an uneven way. But he's actually taking images and twisting and bending the picture plane, which was this sort of sidereal method that he pursued, and Coil are pursuing this same sort of line of thinking. Also, the word sidereal, of course, means of the stars, basically cognate to the word astral, that we also see appearing in Balance's notes, relating to the stars, and also this idea of the astral plane or the etheric realm, this kind of imaginative, like mental space of images and fluidity and spirits and all the rest that it's so important in modern esoteric practice. But I think Balance and maybe Spare himself is definitely hearing in the word sidereal, kind of breaking it down into side real, and so the idea of things coming through sideways, and things being sort of twisted and revealing dimensions of them that are otherwise hidden or concealed. So revealing sort of the occult dimensions of sound, just like Spare was doing with images. All right, so following along with this idea here, in an interview with Mark Pilkington, Balance says, what Spare did in his art, we try to do through music. This is why we do sidereal sound. The way he twisted his pictures so that the geometry appears warped, we try to do that, to produce strange geometries through sound so that it comes out sideways. We do it with technology, with 3D devices, phasers, out of phasers, all sorts of gizmos. There's no particular box that does it. We do it in any possible way we can. So again, making that close connection to the way that they're processing sound with the way that Spare created images. And we see another example of this kind of sidereal method of Spare's here on the screen. A work called In Betweenness from the 1946. And we can see here that not only do we have an image, the figure there is again kind of distorted and twisted, as if the picture plane is being sort of bent, like we're looking kind of behind or through or inside of the image in some ways, but also releasing these sort of spirit forms that we see so often in Spare, connected with automatic drawing, both in its more surrealist kind of psychological interpretation, as well as the more spiritualist idea, and connected with ideas of ectoplasm and the artist acting as a sort of medium, bringing the invisible into the visible. But I know I kind of get the impression from this image that as the picture plane is sort of bent or opened up, we get these sort of spirit forms or invisible things sort of becoming visible as if they're being released by the image, which I don't know, I think is quite suggestive for the way that Coil worked, of trying to take sounds and you sort of bend them and twist them and reveal again, the things hit the sort of occult aspect of sound and sound sources, some of which are, of course, are sampled and transformed into something else. As we move through the 90s, we'll see an increasing amount of instrumental works, so fewer vocals, and beginning to work sort of directly with sound and relying less on like words to suggest esoteric correspondences, but attempting to do this sort of directly through the manipulation of sound. And I think that this connection to Spare's sidereal method is an important way of understanding the way that even in instrumental or more abstract works, that the esoteric intention and the magical intention is never absent. All right, so a year or so later, they release the first of several works that are kind of credited jointly to Coil and to Elf. This is also the beginning of a series of works that are credited to another name other than Coil, a couple of kind of side projects that are still essentially Coil. I mean, it's Balance and Christofferson and some of their various collaborators and other members, but they are, I think, intentionally stepping away from the reputation and the expectations of that had started to be built up over their albums from the 80s into the early 90s. So Elf is an entity that they felt themselves to be in communication with at various times in their work, some sort of discarnate intelligence. At different points, they sort of talk about this in different ways, so it's never, I think they themselves were never really clear. Sometimes it seems like an idea that they were playing with or were interested in that concept, other times seeming to be more convinced that there really was another entity that was manifesting primarily through like glitches and failures in their studio processes. I think partially we see here the legacy of William Burroughs and surrealism of seeing, the idea that accidents are not truly accidents, that through, contingent or, apparently randomized processes, and again through seeming accidents, that a kind of subconscious intention is revealed, or, speaking more magically, that those things can be understood as the work of a spirit or another entity. So they felt themselves, at least possibly, to be in contact or in a kind of collaboration with a spirit that they named Elf. In some later interviews, Balance speaks of Elf as a transmission from Sirius, though this may be sort of a later interpretation based on some of his later interests in more kind of cosmic themes, and possibly also in connection with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who he became very interested in later on. And Stockhausen also had a sort of connection with the star Sirius, and we can talk about that briefly in a future video when we talk about some modern composers and esoteric influences in that work. Stockhausen actually sort of believed himself to have come from the star Sirius, or to be sort of reincarnated from a planet circling around that star. So anyways, this is the first, and this is in an EP. There's a track called Protection that's just credited to Coil, and then 3 other tracks that are credited to Coil versus Elf. Again, incorporating various sort of glitches and like technical malfunctions, but using those as, as a new way of thinking about or creating sound. The album cover here, I think, is also rather interesting and touches on some themes that we've already talked about and that were important to Coil. The title "Born Again Pagans" is kind of a funny sort of reference to their own pagan identity. And And I don't know what we mentioned it in the first video, but there's certainly a sense of humor all throughout Coil's works. Sometimes a fairly dark or twisted sort of sense of humor, but it definitely is always there. So let's see. So in this image, we see an image of, this is Saint Sebastian, who was, I don't know if there's any actual historical precedent for him, but, he's considered to be a martyr from back in the Roman times, a sort of Christian martyr who is, often depicted as bound to a tree and having being shot with arrows. From, I don't know, going at least back to the times of Oscar Wilde, possibly earlier, Saint Sebastian is also became something of a gay icon. The Derek Jarman, the filmmaker, who we will do a video on later in this series, who was a sort of personal friend of the members of Coil, and Coil also collaborated with Jarman and did some music for a few of his films, and we'll save that for when we talk about Jarman. But Jarman's, I believe it's his first full-length film, was on Saint Sebastian, so that was certainly something that I'm sure would have been on their mind. And I'm trying to remember what year. I believe Jarman died in, was it 93 or possibly 94? Jarman died of AIDS around this time, so there may be some reference to Jarman and his works here in this cover. Though obviously here this image has been manipulated to make it obviously sort of psychedelic. And we also see a ring of, looks like Amanita muscaria mushrooms being added around St. Sebastian's feet. So obviously the reference there not just to psychedelic substances, but also the idea of a kind of the fairy ring, as if this Christian icon is being sort of further diverted or twisted, again, not just into a gay icon, but into a kind of magical, sort of pagan, almost fey sort of image here, which, again, I think reflects some of Coil's approach to taking, images that already exist and then sort of twisting them and bending them and turning them into, to something new and more complex. All right, a year later, we have, this is Elf versus Coil, rather than Coil versus Elf. I'm not really sure what the apparent distinction there was, but now we have a whole album worth of this sort of collaboration, again, with this entity manifesting itself through various glitches and malfunctions, as well as some found sort of sound sources. Now this, the concept of glitch and like glitch music, that became an important thing in 90s electronic music and continues to be discussed today. But I believe this album came out something like 6 months before that term was really like coined in, I believe it was in an issue of The Wire. So we see Coil really anticipating that later interest in glitch and its use in music. For sure, the glitch is a pretty abstract, sort of work. Also, definitely much more minimalist. Drew McDowell had joined Coil. I think it was in '94 or maybe '93, and I think he certainly brought some of that, kind of minimalist and more abstract aesthetic to a lot of the Coil works from this point forward. Definitely a very interesting and strange album here. But again, most of the tracks are instrumental, but I think we see not just the magical intention to work with this entity manifesting through the studio, but I think also revealing more of this sort of sidereal approach of taking sounds and processing them and really using software and other studio equipment in ways that they're really not designed to be used, but in order to create unexpected and new sort of sounds, and again, referring back to or utilizing that alchemical sort of attitude of processing and pulling things apart. All right. Also skipping over an album. There's an album credited to the name Black Light District from a year or two after Worship the Glitch, which I really like. I think it's an underappreciated album, but I didn't have a lot to say about it in the course of the context of this video and talking about Coil's sort of esotericism. But definitely an interesting album to listen to. Yeah, that's Black Light District's 1,000 Lights in a Darkened Room. All right, and then in 1998, we have the last of these sort of side project, kind of non-Coil Coil works. So this is the album Time Machines, credited to Time Machines, but it's John Balance, Peter Christopherson, and Andrew McDowell, and I believe at least about sort of 75-80% of the album was actually created by McDowell himself. So we have 4 relatively long tracks here, all very minimal, like drone-based synthesizer works. Yes, each track is each track is named after a different drug, which I think having tracks with these sort of chemical formula names is pretty interesting. Though I think the specific references to the drugs can be a little bit misleading. It's not necessarily music to be like listened to while in an altered state. Though I think the idea of music functioning as a drug or music's ability to alter consciousness and perception is certainly an important reference. And the intention here with these works was to create these drone compositions that would, in some sense, free the listener from the perception of time and induce a sensation of being outside or beyond the normal flow of time, which is a theme will certainly very psychedelic, and obviously there's a mystical and magical element there as well, and we will see it again in some of Coil's later works. Let's see. So we're going to talk about some of the kind of images and references that we find within the album artwork itself for Time Machines, because I think it enhances it and is just again another nice demonstration of some of Coil's the dense esoteric references that they're weaving throughout their works. The first thing to notice here on the album cover, this black sort of egg shape here is, among other things, an image of a scrying mirror, like a polished black obsidian mirror, which I know Balance was experimenting with, and maybe some of the other members as well were experimenting with scrying through these mirrors around this time, and also has a particular reference to John Dee. And we will see that in just a minute. So also on this album art, and then continuing on from this point forward, Coil began to use this glyph, which is the Monas Hieroglyphica, or a kind of slight variation of the Monas Hieroglyphica, and we see it there, on the left from the Time Machines album artwork, and then on the right in a later promotional photo. So this image, the Monas Hieroglyphica, the hieroglyphic monad, is drawn from the works of John Dee, the Elizabethan era magician. He was Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer. He also received what became known as the Enochian language, the Enochian magical system that was hugely influential on the Golden Dawn and utilized by Aleister Crowley, especially in his work, The Vision and the Voice. So an extremely important figure in the development of like modern magic. So in Dee's book, Monas Hieroglyphica, which is a really complex and dense work, he creates this glyph, which he then analyzes and talks about its sort of powers and significances at very great length. So just a couple of kind of notes about its significance. We see in the image on the top that he's combining, we have the crescent for the moon, the kind of horns of this figure, and then the circle with the point in the center, which is the glyph of the sun. Then the four-armed cross that we see there, he's using as an image of the elements. The 4 elements are often pictured as a cross. And then finally, the curly shape at the bottom is being attributed to fire because it is essentially a slightly distorted version of the glyph for the astrological sign Aries, which is the fire sign ruled by Mars. And so at the bottom here, this is the alchemical fire, the fire of transformation below, so the flames below the elements here. The combination or the unification of the sun and moon is central central image and process within alchemy. And it's also something we will see repeatedly in Coil's work from this point onward. There's an enormous amount that we could say, of course, about the significance of the unification of the sun and moon, but certainly always standing for the unification of opposites, whether that's the kind of the solar conscious versus the lunar unconscious, the sort of solar mind or the lunar body, the sort of hot and dry sun, the cold and wet moon, the masculine sun, the feminine moon, and all sorts of other, the sun's gold and the moon's silver, and all sorts of other sets of oppositions and contrary ideas, and their union together is one way of talking about or pointing towards the alchemical great work and the overcoming and unification of opposites, which we've already talked about, and having a sort of surrealist reference as well, and that's of course one of the reasons the surrealists were so interested in alchemy, is for that what they saw as the reflection of their own project, or the other way around perhaps, within the works of the alchemists. The Monas Hieroglyphica can also be analyzed, as we see in the bottom image, as not just including the images of the sun and moon, but the other 7 planets as well. So we see Saturn, Jupiter, 2 different versions of Mercury, and then over on the right, Mars and Venus. So the Monas Hieroglyphica is also the unification of the 7 planets, making it a kind of total sort of universal symbol of the full complement of the cosmic powers. All right, so going back to the album art for Time Machines, we see again the Monas Hieroglyphica within the white egg shape there. And then in the sleeves, we also have this same sort of analysis of the Monas Hieroglyphica into different pieces there. So we see the circle, the crescent, the cross, and then the ignis, the fiery sort of variation on Aries there. Each one is being associated with one of the 4 tracks on the Time Machines album, and they're also being colored in these very bright, sort of striking colors here. Certainly there's a psychedelic aspect there as well, but this is also a definite reference to what were called the tattva images that were used by the Golden Dawn. This originally derives from like Indian practices that were taken up into Theosophy, and then from Theosophy, the Theosophical Society passed to the Golden Dawn, where you have colored, for example, a yellow square represents earth, a blue circle represents air, the silver crescent represents water, and they are visualized or sometimes actually painted or drawn against a background of a complementary color, where you may not be able to see it so well on the screen, but looking at saturated complementary colors like this has a very particular kind of optical effect and can produce a kind of like shimmering or wavering sort of effect that I think has there's a certain sensory similarity between that optical effect and the sound that we get on some of the tracks here in Time Machines. So I think that's sort of quite interesting. They're making this sort of sensory link between this tattva practice that the Golden Dawn used, and that was used for scrying as well. So tapping back into John Dee's use of the black scrying mirror that we already saw there. The tattva images were also used as a way of shifting into any kind of astral consciousness or a perception of subtle forms in the Golden Dawn system of training. All right, let's see, moving along here. So in the late 90s, this is kind of around the period that we start to shift into what Balance will later refer to as moon music or their lunar period, though I think that idea hasn't quite crystallized here. But we have this is the Solstice and Equinox series, which is a series of 4 EPs that were recorded on or very near. I think the recording sessions were begun right about the actual moment of the 4 equinoxes and solstices in 1997. and then they were finished and then released on the equinoxes and solstices of the following year. So here we see not just a ritualized creation of music, but also a sacred dimension here that I think becomes increasingly important in Coil's work, and a kind of real pagan sensibility here of wanting to connect the creation of this music to these four sort of sacred stations of the sun throughout the course of a year, and the interest in cycles as well becomes an important reference in some of their later works. So yeah, they're initially released or issued as 4 EPs, and then later collected together as Moon's Milk in 4 phases, which I think a lot of the newer issues or newer releases of that also have a bonus CD of some other recordings from that time. Let's see. So just sort of talking through briefly each of the 4 EPs. So they started, as is sort of natural for thinking about these cycles with the spring equinox. So let's see. We see on the cover of this initial release here, we have a circle with a cross inside of it, an important esoteric symbol that can be interpreted in a number of different ways, but just simply here as the circle as the wheel of the year, the sun's course along the ecliptic over the course of the year, and then the 4 arms of the cross referring to the 2 equinoxes and the two solstices, the sort of high and low, and then 2 balance points of the sun's journey throughout the year. Let's see. So this spring equinox, Moon's Milk or Under an Unquiet Skull, this is probably my favorite of the 4. It's sort of 2 versions of a long, like drone-based piece that, I really like a lot. All right, and then the next release for the summer solstice, Bee Stings, and here we see that circle and cross now transformed into something that resembles a honeycomb, obviously related to bees and to summer. And an interesting, reoccurrence of a theme that we've already an image that we've already talked about from the song Ostia. We saw the images of bees and honey there. Obviously, just a kind of recurring image in Coil's work. Let's see. I don't have a ton to say about this one. This is maybe my least favorite, or the one that I feel the least sort of connection to of the 4. But I think it's interesting to listen to to each one of them and to try to feel the sort of connection between the particular sounds or the words in those tracks that do have lyrics, and the sort of associations with that particular season. In their working methods, I believe they were trying to work in a very spontaneous sort of way, so without a lot of planning and rehearsal, just trying to act as sort of conduits for that sacred moment, and again in a kind of surrealist sort of way of not allowing the conscious mind to have too much input, but just acting spontaneously and trusting in the chosen moment and the sort of energy of that moment to manifest itself in the music. All right, so here we have the autumn equinox, Amethyst Deceivers, and now that image has transformed into a mushroom. Mushrooms, of course, are associated with the fall season. The appearance of mushrooms in the woods at this time. The song Amethyst Deceivers, that amethyst deceiver is a variety of mushroom, though I think Balance also likes just the combination of those 2 words. There's a sort of surrealist resonance there, and that I have an amethyst deceiver, but a song about mushrooms, which at least in part, of course, is psychedelic mushrooms, a constant sort of theme in their work. Autumn Equinox is really beautiful work. The Rosa Decidua, which has some guest vocals from Rose McDowell of Strawberry Switchblade, is one of, I think, Coil's most beautiful works. I also really like the track Auto-Asphyxiating Hierophant as well. All right, and then, let's just keep moving on here. And then the final one, Winter Solstice. We even have a Christmas track here. This is, I think, the closest Coil ever did to releasing a Christmas album. That song also has some guest vocals from Rose McDowell. I think, on the one, this track, this sort of Christmas song that they do here, Christmas is Now Drawing Near. On the one hand, I think it is a beautiful, traditional folk song, but I think, again, a little bit of a sense of humor that a Christmas album is the last thing anyone would ever expect Coil to do. But obviously, they're, in a way, you could think of it as kind of re-embedding the sacredness of the Christmas season in an older sort of pagan tradition, and that the wheel of the year, and just the simple sacredness of that time. All right. So let's just keep moving on here. All right. So now I think moving more fully into this sort of lunar phase, we have an album called Astral Disaster. There's actually two different versions of Astral Disaster. There's the initial release that was released in, I think, extremely limited numbers through the Prescription label, and then in 1999, and then it was kind of expanded and revised and had some additional material added to it in 2000. I definitely think the later, the 2000 release is definitely the more interesting one. I know the 1999 release was done very quickly, and it feels kind of unfinished and incomplete, though you can still find that. I think it's usually just referred to as the Prescription edition. So incorporating, I think, a lot of the sort of drone and minimalist elements from some of the previous albums in the 90s that we've been talking about here, but also adding, lyrics and vocals back in again. A few of the tracks here a little more sort of song-based, which was also something that you see in the Equinox EPs as well, almost like reintegrating that newer approach with some of their older ideas and approaches. Definitely an album much more oriented towards the watery, the feminine, the lunar, and a lot of tracks here that are really sort of calm and subtle compared to some of the intensity and the sort of darkness of some of the earlier works. The track "The Sea Priestess," the title "The Sea Priestess" is a reference to the Dion Fortune's novel. Dion Fortune, who's someone we can definitely talk about in some future video series, is a really important figure she's a really important figure in 20th century esotericism, kind of coming out of the Golden Dawn tradition, and also really influencing some of the pagan and neo-pagan 20th century movements as well that, Coil, I think, are increasingly connected to. At this time, feeling, again, more and more pagan, more and more connected to the land, towards the sort of earth mysteries and ancient sacred sites and stone circles and things like that are, so important in the UK, and sacred sites like Glastonbury, that Dion Fortune was also extremely interested in. We also have lyrics in that track drawn from Aleister Crowley, who, all throughout Coil's career was an important source of lyrics and images and everything else. Definitely a really great album and worth listening to. Let's keep moving on here. All right, so in 1999, they released the first of the 2 volumes of Music to Play in the Dark. This is the first volume here, and now we've fully sort of moved into what is now consciously understood as their lunar period. Let's see. So in some ways, I think developing the same sort of approach that we saw with Astral Disaster and the Equinox EPs, and also really referencing here back to sort of Tangerine Dream, and some of that sort of Kosmische sort of stuff coming out of 1970s Germany, synthesizer music, and a kind of cosmic element of that music becomes a really important reference point here. In addition to, of course, Balance and Christopherson and Drew McDowell is still on this album here. Well, actually, he may have been on Astral Disaster, but I think here we really see Paul Sandra, the Welsh musician who had played with sort of Julian Cope, and also released a number of solo albums and things like that as well. But he, as a sort of classically trained musician and sort of synthesizer expert, really brought a level of musical skill and expertise that I think really enhances the music here, where Balance and Christopherson were intentionally sort of non-musicians making music in that kind of brain, sort of school of thought. The musicality of Paul Sandra, I think, is really a great benefit here. Let's see, we'll talk about some of the lyrics to the first and last tracks here in just a moment. The second track, Red Birds Will Fly Out of the East and Destroy Paris in a Night. That title is drawn from one of the prophecies of Nostradamus. So an interesting esoteric reference there. And the track itself is practically a cover or a near cover of a Tangerine Dream song. Red Queen, that title both a reference to Alice in Wonderland as well as to alchemy. Now, normally the king in alchemy is associated with the color red, and which red is a kind of heraldic equivalent to gold. So here we have the queen would normally be associated with the color white and with silver and the moon. But Red Queen is a kind of combination of opposites of gold and silver, or of solar and lunar here. Which is a theme we just talked about a few minutes ago. The track Broccoli is a track about ancestor worship and communication with the dead. I always find it sort of striking. This is something Balance talked about in a lot of interviews from around this time, of both communicating with his own personal ancestors, as well as, I think, especially Osman Spare, who Balance felt himself to be in communication with Spare's spirit, often through Spare's works that they owned, a number of Spare's original paintings and drawings. I find it kind of striking that idea of ancestor worship and working with ancestors, especially when family histories are troubled, which Balance certainly was. He was abused as a child, I think largely by his stepfather, and had very broken relationship with his family, but working with ancestors and speaking with ancestors as a way of healing that lineage and reconnecting to one's own roots is something that has become really important in a lot of more recent esotericism. I think it's something that you now see quite commonly in magical and esoteric works in the last 10, maybe a little bit more years. But again, I think Coil just being, having that intuition or being ahead of their time in a very striking way. All right, so here we have lyrics to the first track on the album, Are You Shivering, as well as a text that's in the box on the left-hand side there that Balance had originally written. I believe they were intended to be like liner notes, but weren't actually included on the album, but were posted on the website Brainwashed. So let's see, in these notes this is specifically about this album, Music to Play in the Dark, he writes, "This is moon music. Coil are creating lunar consciousness music for the foreseeable future. It goes against previous magical currents we have invoked. We are letting things in we shut out before, the feminine, the tidal, the cyclical, and so on." Some of these things we've already talked about here, and certainly those the sort of feminine, the tidal, the cyclical, references to water, to oceans, to the moon, things we've already seen with Astral Disaster and with the Equinox EPs, but here now even more sort of consciously and deliberately being formulated here as an attempt to invoke a new magical current. I think also significant that it goes against the previous magical currents that they had understood themselves to have been working with, which now understanding, especially the works from the 80s and into the early 90s, as solar or their solar period, which they saw as a period of hedonistic indulgence, very heavy use of drugs and mind-altering substances, and just a kind of intensity that I think Balance himself has felt was really destroying him and had been kind of eating him up. By this point, he was struggling, had been struggling for years with a fairly severe alcoholism that he talks about in interviews as being something that he first began drinking as a way of dealing with the come down and the re-entrance, the sort of painful and difficult re-entrance into ordinary reality after leaving, the sort of psychedelic or the altered state. But then eventually it's something he needed to just sort of to deal with being part of reality at all. And I think, in this shift to lunar music, they are, he, I think, really wanted to, to shift into something that was both sustainable, that was healing, and would also provide, a balance with that earlier sort of solar approach. And so, and I think in this song, we see, among several other sort of themes or levels, some elaboration of what the moon and this shift towards lunar consciousness music sort of meant for them at this time. As always with Balance's lyrics, there's always a number of different levels that are all being sort of invoked simultaneously. I think one of the things that makes his lyrics so resonant and powerful, the way that they, there's always these multiple levels kind of operating simultaneously, and sometimes even almost in conflict with each other. They never, you can never reduce a set of his lyrics to being about a simple subject. I think, again, there's a sort of surrealist element there for sure, of kind of associating around something or drawing different sort of possible connections between things rather than sort of narrowing them down to a simple meaning or intention. But, a lot of associations, connections, and the sort of development or kind of autonomous development of images or even the sounds of words. So let's see, I've excerpted some of the lyrics from this track here. Let's see, in the second line I've quoted there, are you bathed in silver or drowned in gold? Of course, gold and silver are the alchemical metals associated with the moon and with the sun, respectively. And I think, being drowned in gold is, a way of expressing that sense of being sort of overwhelmed or destroyed by their periods of intensity and hedonistic indulgence. But the moon being associated with bathing, is certainly one of the most important sort of magical significances of the moon is with cleansing and purification. The moon, or the what's sometimes referred to as the white work in alchemy, is the work of purification, and bathing, healing, restoring. Let's see, continuing on, this dreams of vitality with filaments as fine as a spider's web, pour through your mouth, that pour through your mouth, O river of silver, O river of flowers, I lie down and shiver in your silver river, out drips the last drop of this vital fluid. Now there's certainly a sort of sexual interpretation of these lyrics that we could give here, obviously to oral sex, the vital fluid being semen, obviously. But, I think that this is the fluid here, obviously resonating with the moon. I think we could also read references here to Mercury, to Quicksilver, a kind of living, silver fluid metal. And again, sort of water-based images here is an important theme at this time, which continue on in the next verse that I've quoted here. In the oceans of the moon, which again associating the moon, with water and with the oceanic, and with the cosmic as well. Of course, people used to believe that there really were oceans on the moon, and the various craters and valleys on the moon are still named as if they were oceans, which is what early astronomers believed. Let's see, swimming squid-like and squalid, this bright moon is a liquid, the dark earth is a solid. again, touching on these kind of elemental and alchemical themes of, the moon and the earth, the relationship between bright and dark, solid and liquid. And then finally, this is moon music in the light of the moon, kind of announcing this new magical current and project that they're working with here. All right, let's just keep moving on. All right, so the last track on the album, The Dreamer is Still Asleep. Again, we see the image of dreams, which is something we see all the way through Coil's work, is that interest in dreams and the dream state. Though I think that has a renewed significance. The moon is very often associated with dreams, with the unconscious, and certainly with the nighttime, which are all sort of dreams there, right? All right, just the sort of first two verses I've taken here. There's a lot more words here that you can take a look at. I think this track, really nice track, and the way the vocals are processed, I think, are a really interesting example of that sort of sidereal approach, where you can hear that the sort of reverb is being applied like backwards to his vocals, as if the vocals have been reversed. There's been some reverberation, filter like applied to his voice, and then it's been reversed again, so that the reverb like precedes the voice and gives a very, I think, strange effect of his voice like coming in from some sort of other kind of sideways space. Definitely something to sort of pay attention to, the effect that creates in the track. Let's see. So yeah, just some of the lyrics here. Hush, may I ask you all for silence. The dreamer is still asleep. May the goddess keep us from single vision and Newton's sleep. So these last two lines are a citation, slightly altered citation from William Blake. Blake writes, may God us keep from single vision and Newton's sleep. Blake's concept of single vision is seeing only the most literal kind of manifest like physical things, but not their sort of imaginative or spiritual or sort of secret hidden dimensions in things, which Blake referred to as Newton's sleep, associating it with with Isaac Newton, obviously. Although of course Blake didn't really know that Newton was also an alchemist and an esotericist in his own right, but I think it certainly applies to a lot of the people who came afterwards, and really the worldview that now like dominates a lot of the West, of thinking that only the material is real. I think in line with this shift towards the lunar and the increasing importance of the sort of paganism here, we have God is now changed to the goddess. It's a nice substitution. Let's see. Continuing on, the dreamer is still asleep. He's inventing landscapes in their magnetic field. The magnetic fields was the sort of kind of could be considered the first work of surrealism, written by André Breton and Philippe Soupal, a couple years before the first Surrealist Manifesto was published. So another reference to surrealism here, and obviously the focus on dreams here again is a surrealist reference, or has a connection to the surrealists and their methodologies. And then last two lines I've quoted here: working out a means of escape, we'll cut across the crop circles. I think cutting across the crop circles, nice image of an enchanted landscape, kind of putting into in very, very modern terms. The 1990s, kind of late 90s was sort of the height of the sort of interest in crop circles, but an interesting, very modern way of looking at a kind of enchanted landscape and relating, the sort of ancient Earth's mysteries, both to, like contemporary forms of esotericism, as well as that interest in the cosmic and the alien, whether it's, transmissions from Sirius, or, even musical references to groups like Tangerine Dream. So interesting to see some of those associations and ideas coming up in different ways in the work. All right, and then a year later, we have the second volume of Music to Play in the Dark. Let's see, not quite as much to say about this second volume. But really, I think of a piece with the first volume. I think they were originally planned as a double album, but then perhaps wisely split into two. Continuing on along with some of the same sort of themes that we've already talked about there. All right, so in the last, hopefully just a few minutes here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the last sort of period of Coil, their last sort of 5 years, in which they began to play live, which is not something they had really previously done, other than I think maybe just one or two very, very early sort of performances that they had been involved in. They never really played live until this sort of final period. So the best resource for Coil's sort of live period for recordings, photos, track listings, other sort of notes about performances and things like that is the livecoilarchive.com. So definitely check that out. Lots of links to different recordings, as well as sort of notes about sort of sound quality and the completeness of various recordings and things like that. All right, here's a quote from another quote from that same interview with Mark Pilkington that I've quoted a couple times already in this video. Balance talking about some of their intention with the live performances. So he says, we try to put magic in the music, and we do a lot of preparation for that, from finding the right frequencies on the modular synthesizers to using the right incense or the right colors on the screen. We usually take stuff from Crowley's book of Magical Correspondences, 777, and mix it with intuition and research. Again, this is something that runs all the way through their music. We had seen that all the way back to How to Destroy Angels, when they were drawing from 777 to invoke the powers of the planet Mars. But here, extending that even into their live performances, the colors on the screen, and the incense as well. They would burn incense before their live performances, both making those performances into ritual actions, but also, really considering all the sort of sensory input there, again, in line with Crowley's own sort of theories of ritual, and I think their own, really remarkable ability to think about all the different dimensions of what they're doing, just like the sort of packaging of albums, the way that albums are being released and distributed. I think here they're applying that same really wide, expanded vision to the actual performances themselves, the costumes that they're wearing on stage, the projections, the color of the lights, and then even the smell, that would permeate the room during the performance. All right, so there's a number of, this is actually a very productive, prolific time for Coil. They release, they're not just touring and releasing live albums, but they also release a number of studio albums during this time period. So I just made up a quick little chart. Some of this is a little bit fuzzy, so this is just kind of a rough sort of guide to some of what's going on here. We have a number of different tours or phases with different names, and we'll talk briefly about each one of them in some of the following slides. You also have a one or more live albums associated with each one of those phases. The Live 1, Live 2, Live 3, and Live 4 were all issued during Balance's, both Balance and Christofferson's own lifetime. Thigh Paul Sandra, who was a member of Coil in this late period, played live with them, has also released a number of kind of remastered live recordings, including Live 5, which is sort of related to the Live 4 period, and some others as well that you can all get from his website. A lot of them are free to download too, which is really nice. Let's see, and then we also have some corresponding studio albums. A lot of times the studio recordings that were being released at a given time have a definite relationship with the live period, things either being worked out live and then recorded in the studio, or sometimes the other way around. Though whenever they're performing live, there's always a very spontaneous, improvisational sort of element. Different performances of the same track are not just different from the studio versions, but often different from each other, from one night to another of performance. Which is, I think, interesting to see if you listen to some of those recordings, the way that things are being sort of transformed and reconfigured again and again in different permutations, and again that interest in sort of the spontaneity of the particular moment and of the unconscious and sort of intuition. They also spoke, drawing on some ideas from like William Burroughs and Brian Geisen, talking about the idea of a third mind, that in the live performance, the member, or in recording, the members of the group having a kind of psychic connection to each other and having an agency that is not really coming from any one individual member of the group, but emerging through their kind of like collective resonance with each other, which certainly became an important part of their approach to playing live. All right, let's see. So the first tour here, Time Machines from the Heart of Darkness. We see these funny, fuzzy outfits that they wore during this time period. Music here very similar to the Time Machines album. Very, very drone-based sort of synthesizer music. Let's see, their second tour, recorded on the Live 2 recording, also reflected in the studio album Constant Shallowness Leads to Evil, though I really think the live performances of some of these tracks are a lot more interesting than the studio version. Let's see, this is a very noisy, intense sort of period. Where the track that I think when they performed it live, it was usually referred to as Constant Shallowness Leads to Evil. And then on the album, it's referred to as Tunnel of Goats, a very loud, noisy, sort of extended modular synthesizer piece that was intended. I think this is sort of interesting. Unlike a lot of other, I think, noise music, there was a very definite sort of intention to create a space that would be, I think, both move people out of themselves, into a kind of ecstatic state, but also, in some interviews, Balance talks about trying to create a kind of like cocoon or a sort of space where people can be sort of temporarily freed from media and advertisement and all the bombardment by signals and images of the modern world. So I just think it's interesting that they would use these kind of extreme, noise at very high volumes for extended periods of time, but with this very definite intention to create a space that would be sort of positive and healing and transformative in a very beneficial sense for their audience. All right. So this is also from this same time period. There's a track called "What Kind of Animal Are You?" I have a few excerpts from the lyrics here. I think in connection, both to Balance's long-term interest in Osman Spare, who had a concept of what he called atavistic resurgence, this sort of descending back through the evolutionary history, like kind of moving backwards, not just into our human ancestors, but our pre-human ancestors as well, and sort of following the course of evolution back to a kind of like unitary state in like the first cells, or the origin of life, is an interesting kind of reverse sort of mystical path of descending sort of downward into animality and this sort of physicality and human descent, very different from the often kind of New Age approach to evolution of humans ascending, higher and higher towards the divine. Here, the access to that mystical state is by going sort of downward into our evolutionary history, which I think also really resonates with the the interest in paganism and with the earth, of reconnecting to that earthy animal. And again, lunar. I mean, the moon is very often associated with animals and animality, and we see that here in some of these lyrics. The ancient in the brain is not the cause of our pain. That the animal part of our nature is not the thing that troubles humans. That we are more disturbed by or more troubled, or the worst aspects of sort of human civilization is our disconnection from our animal nature rather than that animal nature itself. Let's say second kind of verse I've quoted here, very kind of psychedelic verse, and touching on a number of themes we've already talked about. And when you strip your plastic back, you'll see, man is the animal, man is divine, there is no time. So, stripping back the false sort of modern appearance to see the truth beneath. So, humans both as animals and as divine, and the sort of unity of that animality and that divinity. And again, this theme of being outside of time that we already touched on with the Time Machines album. Let's see, I'm not going to read through all the rest of the lyrics here, but he's identifying with a dog. There's some interesting wordplay and things like here. I am a dog who leaps between worlds. Possibly a reference to like jackals and Anubis. Jackals are certainly another theme that comes up in Coil that have resonances with Egyptian mythology and being sort of between worlds. That sense of traveling into other spaces and other modes of consciousness and experience. The reference to salamanders here, this is to the idea of the fire salamanders as fire spirits, not the amphibious creatures that we normally call by that name. And then finally, you're sort of asking the audience, what kind of animal are you, to consider each, our own animal nature, and encouraging people to see themselves and understand themselves as animals. All right, so associated with the Live 3 period, this tour is referred to as Anarcadia, also sometimes associated with the phrase all horned animals, again connected to animality. Also the god Pan, who's a pretty constant reference in Coil's work, all the way back to like the track Panic on Scatology, that idea of panic as that sort of fear state. Brought on, by the presence of the god Pan. The phrase Anarcadia being a sort of a neologism, the combination of Arcadia, that the homeland of the god Pan, which is a kind of unspoiled, wilderness where humans and animals lived in a harmony with anarchy, and. Yeah, so the anarchy and Arcadia being combined together as Anarcadia, which in some interviews Balance talks about being an important magical image of Anarcadia that he's attempting to sort of project through their live performances. We can also see the dancers, Massimo and Pierce there in some of these videos. They appeared naked on stage, painted, usually just painted white, though they also had sort of fake, we can see on the image on the right, they had capsules of fake blood in their mouths that they would bite at a certain point during the performances. Also up on the sort of top left there at the beginning of the shows, there's this almost like shamanic kind of performance at the beginning where the members were shaking kind of bells as a kind of banishing ritual element before the performance started. All right, let's see. And so associated with this time, we also have the album, The Remote Viewer. Remote viewing, of course, is related to scrying. I'm sure some of you are familiar with what remote viewing is. Both the Soviet and American intelligence agencies experimented with remote viewing in the 20th century, and seeing if useful intelligence could be gathered by these sort of psychic means. This is sort of 3 tracks here on this album, drone-based, though here the drone is primarily being generated by the hurdy-gurdy and by bagpipes, so a shift from more purely electronic, there's still electronics, but from a more purely electronic way of generating sound back to these old, traditional European instruments, and connecting that, their electronic kind of drone project back to these very older sort of roots, even like pre-classical roots in European music. And I think this connects to some of the themes that we've talked about already in the first video that Occulture always has a sort of a complicated modern Occulture always has a complicated relationship with time, of being both modern and traditional, but also not really either at the same time, and that this sort of asynchronous temporality, or kind of strange contradictory relationship to time and to time periods, I think is something we definitely see in Coil, all the way back to the manifesto, the out of time, out of place. Let's see. Just a couple of notes here about, I think, the way that some of those themes show up in Coil, the combination of both electronics, or simply a very modern, sort of avant-garde, experimental, whatever you want to call it, sort of approach to music with traditional instruments like the hurdy-gurdy or the bagpipes, and with the magical as well, right? That we have both. These, I think sometimes, sort of magicians or pagans tend to think of, the magical and even, nature and the natural as opposed to the modern or the technological. But we get all of that, really combined together in Coil, and, drawing on that whole range of sort of the magical to the scientific, whether it's interest in the, particular chemistry of various, psychedelic or mind-altering substances, back to, interest in ancient stone circles and ancient ritual practices, use of sort of modernist techniques like the cut-ups drawn from William Burroughs, and both, as we saw with time machines, the reference to scrying mirrors and to Elizabethan era magic, but then, shortly afterwards, talking about receiving transmissions from Sirius. And so I think that, powerful and interesting combination of the ancient and the modern, and the magical, and so on. And this is, I think, related to a theme that was quite big in the 1980s and 90s, touching on sort of pagan and also touching on sort of the chaos magic scene, what's sometimes referred to as techno-paganism, which is something we'll come back to later in this series. But I think, Coil certainly have a connection to some of those ideas for sure. All right, here's just a couple images from the Live 4 period, just showing the elaborate and very colorful sort of psychedelic stage design, the sort of projections and colored lights, the use of dancers and costumes and everything else in their performance. Later tour, Even in Evil Fatigue. Again, showing the sort of costumes and lights and the attention to sort of stage design and its ritual nature. And then finally, their final performance at the Dublin Electronic Arts Festival, I think just a few weeks before Balance's accident that ended his life, which features a bunch of new material that was, I think, going to be the beginning of a new period in their live performances, which I think has some really interesting material. Unfortunately, the one recording that exists is not that great, but is definitely sort of worth listening to for that, their sort of final thoughts and ideas before the end of the group. All right, just briefly, a couple of posthumous releases. This is the album, The Ape of Naples, that was a bunch of kind of things that had been in progress at the time that Balance died in late 2004, that Christopherson sort of finished up. Though he talks about feeling that, Balance was still present in some sort of way, even though he was deceased at that time. The album cover here was done by the artist Ian Johnstone, who's a really interesting artist and was Balance's partner for the last, I think, year or two of Balance's life. He did some of the artwork for the Remote Viewer album that we saw a few minutes ago, as well as a few other Coil albums. All right, so here's a few of the lyrics from the track Fire of the Mind off of Ape of Naples. Let's see, he sings, death is centrifugal, solar and logical, decadent and symmetrical. Angels are mathematical, angels are bestial, man is the animal. Man is the animal, of course, is a phrase that we'd already seen there that was obviously an important idea. And, angels are bestial. Of course, that's a very surrealist kind of combination of opposite things. And, that interest in angels, especially in combining, the angelic with things that are often, the bestial, the low, kind of the underworld, the monstrous, something we see, all throughout Coil's work. References to angels are actually surprisingly sort of common in Coil's work, maybe not what you would expect to see, and I think that's an interesting, we sort of mentioned it once or twice, but I think that's an interesting theme throughout Coil's work. It also really resonates with a lot of Aleister Crowley's work. Crowley was using a lot of the angelic materials drawn from John Dee and the Enochian language, but the materials sort of coming through with Crowley's ritual use of these things are, really, really opposed to Dee's own Christianity and Christian values. And in a work like, The Vision and the Voice, we see extremely monstrous, strange, often, grotesque angels. And I think there's definitely a connection there with some of, Coil's music and imagery for sure. And also the collapsing of the human, the animal, the divine, the high and the low. We see all of that here for sure. The association here of death with the solar, I think, is a rather interesting, partially sort of call back to some of the earlier periods, like to scatology and horse rotavator, and what they would later understand as their solar period, when we also see, a lot of, themes of death coming up quite a bit. I think it's interesting that period, when they were also using the image of the black sun so often, would also be understood as solar, where, we talked about the black sun, at least in part, as a kind of anti-sun, as almost the opposite of the sun, and yet still having some of that same solar intensity and the same solar qualities, even though it is black and dark. Or it's the sun at midnight rather than at noon. It still has a lot of the same kind of energies of the solar. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about the meaning and significance of that symbol and what happens when symbols are reversed and turned into their opposites. All right, let's just keep moving along here and finish up. All right, let's see. This is the sort of final real release of new material in 2008. The album The New Backwards. Some of these tracks had been things that they had been working on all the way back from the early 90s, when they had been working on an album called Backwards for Trent Reznor's label that was simply never released. Let's see, in the track Fire of the Green Dragon, that title is an alchemical reference. So, the Green Dragon is an important alchemical symbol, as is fire. And there's excerpts there there's some of the lyrics to that track are drawn from The Vision and the Voice, work of Crowley's that we've referenced a few times here. And actually, there's references to The Vision and the Voice in some other Coil tracks that we didn't even talk about here, but that's certainly an important reference point. Also, the track "Paint Me as a Dead Soul," the lyrics to that track are taken from a poem by Aleister Crowley. So, Crowley certainly remains a source of lyrics and images and inspiration, all throughout their entire career. All right, so that basically takes us to the end of what I wanted to talk about here. I know this has been a very long video, or pair of videos, but hopefully that's been interesting. I mean, I think there's, Coil have such a vast discography, and it's also complex, that it would be really easy to have gone quite a bit longer. I already mentioned Ian Johnstone, but I just wanted to mention him again here. I think he's a really great, really compelling artist, and both his personal association with balance, as well as all the work the art he did for a lot of Coil's later albums, make him very relevant. I think he's also really continuing to work in a surrealist mode, and a number of his works specifically employ surrealist techniques, like the exquisite corpse technique, which is something we'll talk about in our video about surrealism. I think Johnstone is definitely a really important artist to look into, and there's some really interesting cultural references and a lot of shared sort of images and themes with Coil, and certainly a sort of mutual influence there. All right, just a couple of final suggestions for further reading and listening. There's been a number of books published that sort of touch on Coil in various ways. A few that I found sort of valuable, especially in doing a lot of the research to prepare this video. I already mentioned The Cupboard Under the Stairs, which has, again, a number of facsimile images of some of Balance's notebooks and unreleased writing, and I think also gives a real kind of insight into his creative methods. I think that's an interesting place to look if you want more about his sort of working methods and to understand his his words and sort of poetic concerns in more depth. One of the kind of classic books dealing with Coil is David Keenan's book England's Hidden Reverse, which deals with Coil, as well as others are touched on as well, but primarily two other related groups, Current 93 and Nurse with Wound. That was very difficult to come by for a long time, but it's been recently revised and expanded and reprinted by Strange Attractor Press, which is a press run by Mark Pilkington, who we've already quoted from an interview there, who had connections with Coil, and has also written a lot of really interesting stuff in his own right that has a lot of importance, I think, for modern occulture for sure. Let's see, there was 4 issues of a zine issued by Temporal Boundary Press called Man is the Animal that has some interesting writings there, so you can definitely check that out as well. On the Temporal Boundary website press. I think those issues are still available, though I haven't checked. And then finally, the best source for Ian Johnstone's own work is a book published by Timeless called The Contagious Magic of the Superabundance. So definitely recommended if you want to get a better sense of Johnstone's own work. And there's a bunch of images from some of his collaborations with Coil and his work with both doing album artwork as well as like designs and costumes for their live shows as well. All right, and then just a few notes on some of the after Balance's death. Peter Christopherson, up until the time of his death in 2010, continued to release music. He released a sort of solo album of Time Machines called Time Machines 2, developing some of those same ideas. He also released a few recordings under the name Threshold Houseboys Choir, which I think is really great. I really like the album Form Grows Rampant, so definitely recommend that. He also did a project called Soy Song, collaborating with Ivan Pavlov of the group Sun. It's spelled COH, but it's Cyrillic. It's pronounced sun. I believe it means sleep. Let's see, the group Cyclope is made up of 2 former Coil members, Stephen Thrower, who was a member of Coil in the earlier days, and Austin Brown, who was a member in the later period. Cyclope also did some soundtracks for Derek Jarman, so we'll mention those again when we do a video on Jarman. And again, we'll talk about Coil's work with Jarman, as well as actually Thrubbing Gristle did some work with Jarman as well. So we'll definitely return to some of this this group of artists when we talk about his films. And then finally, Drew McDowell has released a number of solo albums, continuing on, especially in that kind of mode of like Time Machines and some of the more minimalist, sort of drone-based materials from the sort of mid and late 90s with Coil. All right, so that finally brings us to the end of this 2-part video on Coil. Again, I know that was quite long, but I hope this has been interesting. I know Coil fans tend to be fairly obsessive, so hopefully this is appreciated. Let's see, if you like this video, of course you can like and subscribe. Let's see, continue, or please, consider becoming a member of the Patreon, and you can find a link to that in the description below. Within the next week, I'll be back with another video. This time we'll be talking about Alan Moore's comic book series, Promethea, and continuing to develop some of the themes we've talked about here, especially the connection between magic and art and imagination and the transformation of consciousness and the relationship between like psychedelic consciousness and magic, but also coming at it from a very different sort of perspective. So so look out for that within the next week. And thanks for watching. And please feel free to comment. My email address is below if you want to get in contact, ask questions. If you have suggestions, complaints, whatever else, certainly happy to hear them. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.